George Ryan loses his pension, Governor Pat Quinn wants your help fixing the budget, and John Cullerton learns a valuable media lesson. We've got that next on Capitol View. Hello and welcome back to Capitol View. I'm your host this week, John Patterson, the state government editor for the Arlington Heights-based Daily Herald. I run our Capitol Bureau here in Springfield, and we've got a distinguished panel to talk about what's been a busy week around the Capitol with a lot of big political names making news. I'd like to welcome back Bob Gough from, make sure I get it right, quincynews.org.
Yes.
The voice of the Gem City.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for being here and bringing your outside view. And taking a break from his busy schedule in the Daily Herald Springfield Bureau is Tim Magaw, one of our reporters here in Springfield. Tim, thanks for joining us.
Nice to be here.
So, since we last talked, the Illinois Supreme Court has decided that, in fact, George Ryan, the former governor, does not deserve a pension. The governor had lost his pension, forfeited his right to it when he was convicted on federal corruption charges, and he's now in a Terre Haute prison. The argument that his attorney, former Governor Jim Thompson, had made to the Illinois Supreme Court was that he was only convicted for some activities as governor and a little bit in his last term as Secretary of State. So his previous tenure as Secretary of State, Lieutenant Governor, time as the House Speaker, and years as a rank-and-file House member shouldn't be subject to any of this, and he should still get a pension of roughly $70,000 a year. The Illinois Supreme Court didn't buy it in a fairly blunt decision written by Wheaton Republican Bob Thomas. There was one line that pretty much summed it up that says, he gets nothing. And there was one dissent, Ann Burke, who is a Chicago Democrat, who just said that the justices were letting their emotions get the better of them, and that under law this isn't the way things work, and that Ryan deserved a pension. How do you think how did George Ryan's pension fight play out in Quincy?
Well, I think that a lot of people look at this sort of thing and they're tired of the corruption, they're tired of this, and if this is the first step, believe me, it's going to take a lot more than this to clean up Illinois, but maybe this will send some kind of message to say, if you're going to commit a crime while you are a government employee, you will no longer get the perks and benefits of being a government employee. I just think that's the way it should play out, and it sounds like it's the right call from the judges.
I would note that had George not ever been convicted, his pension would be it'd be one of the most lucrative pensions in state history, I think in the $170,000 range, $170,000 range. So this would have bumped it down. He does not leave the game entirely empty-handed, I suppose. He was refunded all of the money that he had ever contributed over 3+ decades in state government, and so he got a lump sum payout of just under $250,000. I think it's $230-some thousand that now goes to his wife and family that are sitting in Kankakee.
Well, I don't have a problem with that. I think that was the money he had contributed into the pension fund, and if he got that money back, that's fine, that's fair. But for him to get the pension, and of course, everybody in Illinois who's paying any attention realizes we're heading for this pension cliff. And when you see the number of pensions that are out there, the sizes of these pensions, especially when you look at people like school superintendents, who are some of the highest paid people in the state, and their pensions are well in excess of $200,000 a year. This state cannot sustain that any longer, and at some point some common sense is going to have to prevail, and they're going to have to put some caps on that. I mean, there are people now in this state who are making pensions that were higher than the salaries they actually received when they were working. Now, please tell me how that makes sense and how we can sustain that.
It's easy. You need to spend more time in Springfield, Bob. and George Ryan would have been one of those people who would have made more
Sure.
in a pension. The kind of closing chapter on George is that he's still in prison, and that he is asked to be. His family has asked President Obama to let him out to commute his sentence, and so far they haven't heard anything back. That George is apparently in bad health. He wasn't the model of health when he was out in governor, and his wife is aging, and so is he, but we haven't heard anything yet on any request to let him out. We'll switch gears a bit and go from George's pension to the as you mentioned, the budget disaster, and Governor Quinn got some extra time to come up with his budget speech, and in the interim, while he's putting that together, he's asking the public for help. And so this past week, he unveiled a website. Tim, you know it because I keep forgetting it.
Yeah, it's www.budget.illinois.gov, I believe it is.
And that went online this past Wednesday, and basically it gives a bunch of numbers that may or may not make any sense to anybody, depending on how much you follow state government, and provides a feedback option. People can go on and put comments, they can post suggestions, they can, if you've got a budget report sitting around your house that's the greatest idea that you wish you were governor and could get enacted, you can click on the attachments and upload it to the governor's office. And supposedly he's going to take this all into effect and for his March 10th speech. Tim, I know you've been checking out some of the comments.
Yeah, well, overall, I think the website, the first thing I thought of when I went to it, it looked kind of amateurish. And you open it up, and there's this YouTube video of the governor's budget director just kind of laying it out, and it just seemed kind of, the production was kind of low. And then seemed like a few spreadsheets that were up, and then just begging for people to comment. And it's gotten about, I think, more than 1,000 comments so far, but it's pretty much the kind of suggestions you expect. You'd expect, oh, if lawmakers cut their salaries in half or didn't take salaries, or if the governor would stop flying back and forth to Springfield, this whole thing would be solved. And strange things like that. I think there was one suggestion who had a 1-cent tax on every fast food item sold in the state. And but it's just kind of seems like a big populist move. I don't know what good the governor could get out of it.
If you, and scanning over them, it might explain, actually the lesson to learn out of it is you quickly realize perhaps why we haven't had a budget agreement in a while. There was, as I was going through them at one point, there was a post that says, you know, reduce every tax, cut every tax, we got to get rid of taxes. And the very next post is, we need to raise taxes. And so I agree, I don't know how much clarity is going to come out of that. There's also I believe a nun from Dubuque, Iowa, who has posted a governor to help your budget, please end the death penalty. So it's been described by one person as kind of like a tip line in a murder case with all of the crazies coming in and posting whatever you want. Bob, I'm sure you've gone out and posted your budget plans.
Well, I've looked at it briefly when it came out yesterday, but I think the biggest thing to look at, judging from the governor's speech yesterday, was the $2 billion of this cuts, the bulk of it coming from education, and a lot of the groups are coming out and saying that education's bearing the brunt of this thing. I know in Quincy, there's already been talk of the school district will meet next week to close one of the alternative schools, which serves some of the troubled kids. They're also going to cut a program that serves some teen parents, and a lot of the feedback in Quincy is, the state's not only throwing this on the backs of the kids, then a lot of the school districts are throwing it on the backs of the poor kids. You're getting that's the kind of response that we're hearing, and you're not seeing, I know education is a huge part of this budget, but there have got to be other things that they can look at besides that. And yeah, there are going to be some cuts, but when you hear the kinds of cuts that are being talked about, Peoria's closing a high school, I believe. Springfield's closing a high school, I believe. And Chicago's looking at closing 6 to 8 schools. I mean, look at what is going to happen here, and there's got to be some other way. You've got to find some other cuts in there besides just education.
I thought one of the more telling comments from Mr. Vaught, the budget director, in the speech yesterday was that someone asked him, I believe it was a St. Louis area TV reporter, said something about schools suffering in southwestern Illinois. I realize they're suffering everywhere, but
right.
That's what you ask when you're a local reporter. And the budget director pointed out that he had previously served on a school board, and when a referendum had failed, that the school board had laid off 1/3 of the teachers in that district. And if there's anything that I think probably scares school officials around the state, it's that, because we're not really used to having people in Springfield who have actually done stuff before.
Right.
And if he's bitten the bullet and done it on a local level, that's about as angry a reaction as you're going to get. On the state level, you kind of filter out that emotion, and it's just starting to look at the numbers, which we haven't for a while. And he seems like a fairly blood and guts kind of guy when it comes to the budget. So, and this is going to get pretty bloody and gutty.
But yeah, and that's what it looks like is going to happen out of the state. But I just don't. I don't think that these school districts are going to be able to go to their people, to their communities, and say, you've got to make this up. Quincy, we haven't passed a school tax referendum in probably 30 years. So I would be surprised if a lot of districts are going to be receptive to want to raise taxes in light of the state cuts. I know Sangamon County is considering a sales tax, I believe. Are the voters going to go for this? And is that going to be the solution? Are they going to do that and make up the difference from the state? I just don't see that happening.
Back to the comments, a lot of talk on there was not so much suggestions, but almost pleas from service providers who aren't getting paid for the services they're providing for the state. There was a lot of talk about medical support and stuff like that. So besides from suggestions on the governor's website, it's a lot more complaining than...
Well, if nobody's getting paid, where the hell is all the money going? I guess that's...
Well, I think what everyone's finally realizing is, when this passed, it was described as basically a 6-month budget masquerading as a 12-month. It was a 12-month budget, only had 6 months worth of money.
Right.
We're now in, like month 7 or 8. And lo and behold, we don't have any money. And I think that it's going to get progressively worse as we head through this fiscal year and into the next budget year. That you're going to see longer and longer delays. My own experience is I just had a son go to the dentist, and my wife works for the state, and through those benefits, the dentist said, I haven't been paid in like 6 months, so we need you to pay up front, and then here's the forms to get reimbursed. So now we get to wait for the state, and that's by no means. Don't feel sympathy for me, but that's the whole. I didn't have my teeth pulled, but that's just one example. There's people out there that are owed hundreds of millions of dollars when you get to the universities that are questioning,
Right.
How are we going to make payroll? Is there a date that we close down and stop doing this? And do we push it? Springfield seems to respond best to a crisis, and I get the sense that outside of Springfield, everyone's kind of wondering, well, what do we do now? And it's...
If this isn't a crisis, what is a crisis? Maybe that's the point we're getting to.
And I keep coming back to as my life repeats itself. In 1990, as a young student journalist at Southern Illinois University, the summer that I chose to stay and work at the college paper was the summer that Jim Edgar and Mike Madigan decided to have a 6-week stalemate on the budget, and I didn't get paid for 6 weeks. And so now I'm just kind of back around to where I was 20-some years ago. What do you think the likelihood is? I'll start with you, Tim. That anything on the governor's website ends up in his budget speech.
I have a feeling, knowing Pat Quinn, I wouldn't be surprised if he pulled out one good story out there that'll help his cause and whatever it is, and point out one person who commented on his website just so he feels good about himself and knows that this wasn't just, or put it out there that it wasn't just a ploy. So I don't think he'll completely ignore it. He put it out there. He talked about it a lot. It's typical Pat Quinn. This is typical Pat Quinn. I don't know how else to put it.
Kind of back to things that have been going on at the Capitol. The big stir recently amongst the media was that the Senate decided to meet behind closed doors to talk about the state budget. Not all 59 members were there. There were some absences, but they didn't have an actual head count. But the Senate President John Cullerton and Senate Republican leader Christine Radogno, they decided that it was appropriate for all of their members to meet in a committee room at the Capitol and hear a briefing from officials from the National Conference of State Legislatures that was there to basically say things are tough all over. You guys are familiar with your situation in Illinois. Here's what we're seeing around the country in various states. They gave them some information, background of how bad it is in other states, where Illinois falls in, a little bit of what other states are attempting to do or thinking of doing. So that was all fine and dandy, except for the fact that this was behind closed doors. The media was not let in. I believe led largely by the Chicago Tribune, and then kind of the rest of us chiming in. There was a quick and decisive aftermath of fury from editors and reporters, and Cullerton quickly backed off and said that he didn't say he was sorry or there was a mistake, but that this would never happen again. So you're the outsider in the group. Does anybody in Quincy care that this happened?
Yeah, we had quite a bit of a reaction. I posted the story on my website, and a lot of people did care. When you look at this and then combine this with the decision that looks like that all the FOIA changes that were made, maybe we made too many, and maybe we need to toughen this thing up again. I mean, you have that in the face of basically the press blackout of the caucus. It just looks like business as usual in Springfield, and I think people are paying attention. I think people are getting sick of it. I mean, how tone deaf are you to do this? I mean, it just flies in the face of everything we've been going through in this state over the last 2 decades, pick them. It is inexcusable, and they should have known better.
And that's the kind of the interesting follow-up story that I wrote was looking at that, this is kind of for those that don't pay a great deal of internal attention to the Capitol. I mean, there are caucuses almost every session day. And particularly in the Senate, it's interesting because you have a supermajority of Democrats who, when they get along, are the Senate. And they go behind closed doors all the time. And, my editors in Arlington Heights are kind of like, well, why aren't those open? And I'm like, well, there's Supreme Court decision from, I believe, 1980 that says it's okay, and it just happens. And then comparing that, so in theory, the Senate could end up with 58 members in some political world and still have closed-door caucuses. It's just that when you invite that one extra person in then for a joint caucus, that some issues get raised. As I said, I don't think it will happen again. And there is an interesting question of whether it was like a test case to see if this will happen again.
Yeah, because it doesn't really seem like when we called some of the senators and you asked, did you know it was closed? And a lot of them had no idea it was closed, and then they were like, there were no reason it should have been closed. It was just sounded like a glorified PowerPoint presentation, and it didn't even seem like any ideas were even thrown out there how to solve this crisis that they were discussing. So it just really made no sense why they did it in the first place.
And there is the question of why do you need to bring somebody in to tell you
it's like,
things are bad?
Yeah, it's like bringing in an outsider to tell us all we're all wearing blue blazers.
I didn't get the memo that we weren't supposed to. So.
Bob had mentioned the Freedom of Information Act, which leads us to our next fun topic, which is a bit of a Daily Herald guilty pleasure, I will admit. If you may recall, Governor Quinn gave a rather lengthy State of the State address a few weeks back, and I believe if you stop by the Capitol, it may still be echoing in some corners. But during that speech, he referenced his Super 8 discount card. And I was sitting in my office and taking notes on this, and having heard the governor reference his Super 8 card on numerous times, I finally kind of had enough. And so as soon as the speech ended, I was typing up a Freedom of Information Act request in which, first of all, I wanted the yellow crumpled legal pad notes that he had to deliver his speech. And secondly, I wanted a copy of that Super 8 discount card. It was kind of just my own little personal political trophy. I wanted to put on a blog or my wall or do something with. I hadn't quite decided in the name of free press. And not surprisingly, the governor's office said no, and I at least made somebody who has gone to law school sit down and write the governor's Super 8 discount card is his personal card and not subject to disclosure, which is probably not what she thought she was going to be doing when she was spending that third year of law school in the law library. From there, the story kind of took on its own little life, and I will let Tim add the next chapter since he had more to do with it.
Well, basically, we heard the governor was going to be in Springfield, so I went and sat by the door waiting for him to get there, and he walked in, and I went up and introduced myself and asked the governor why his office didn't turn over his Super 8 card. And he got kind of irritated and said, it's my card, it's not your card, why would I give you my card? And then he asked me if I wanted to see it, and I said yes. Then he called our request for his card disrespectful while he threw his stuff on the ground and pulled out his wallet and pulled out a card and stuck it in my face. I didn't get a clear look at it, so I'm not even sure if that was his Super 8 card. But I had a card in my face. But anyways, so then after talking with another reporter up in the Arlington Heights office who called Super 8, found out that they have not had a VIP discount card in 6 years. So it's been nothing more than a glorified prop. But after pressing his press people a little bit, they just said it was a demonstration, I believe, is what we got out of them. So.
And I will say, on the governor's defense, because his press staff was very concerned that we were going to say he does not stay at Super 8. The governor does stay at Super 8.
Yes.
There's, the Associated Press tracked his expenses after he first got into office and found that on 3 occasions he had stayed at Super 8. And this was just a question, in large part of, I got kind of tired of hearing about the Super 8 card and wanted to see it. So
well, I doubt it's going to come up during the budget address now, which that was...
I would almost bet that it would, but...
Oh.
But in some ways, it is, the reaction that we've kind of had has been, this was a non-story, and I don't know why you guys wasted your time on it. On the other hand, the reaction is that's kind of indicative of a lot of the old Pat Quinn with his populist ideas and his props that have carried over into his administration at a time when there seems to be some difficulty in coming up with a final decision on how are we going to solve this budget, and then getting people rallied behind you on doing that budget.
I think his whole website plays into that whole thing, his whole budget website. So it'll be interesting to see how he uses that and uses the comments in his address or crafting a budget.
I'll ask you for your prediction. What do you think will happen with his budget?
I'm sure it'll be DOA. I mean, I'm sure he won't have the votes. It won't. I don't think it'll pass. I think you'll get something completely different. You'll get something like we had this year, which was a hodgepodge patch job, because I think we all know there's an election in November, and you're not going to get anything meaningful done this year, and that's just the way it is.
The Capitol Insider blog, Capitol Facts, did report this week that allegedly the governor's been approached by the legislative leaders in the Democratic side and said and asked not to do a tax increase. The governor, however, that same day that came out, was in Chicago and was touting. He doesn't call them tax increases; he calls it
Tax reform,
yes,
revenue.
tax reform,
Enhancement.
revenue enhancements.
Yes.
He's very careful since he won the nomination to not say the word tax increase. And his budget director, in his brief presentation, it was basically saying, the governor still supports his plan and for revenue increases, but never said that the plan they will unveil on March 10th, whether or not it would have one in there. So that the working kind of theory within the Capitol is that the legislators are going to be far more in favor of another 6-month temporary budget. Yep. See if you can scrape through till after the elections. See if see who wins the governor's race, and then figure it out from there. It's going to be interesting to see how that pans out, because those unpaid bills for school districts and service providers will only get worse.
Yeah, I mean, unless we get stimulus 2 or something like that, which I still don't think that's not going to be enough. But no, you're not getting anything meaningful done this year, and it'll be an interesting dynamic to see what happens after November. If there are big changes, if obviously it doesn't look like the House and Senate makeups are going to change that much. But if we do end up with a Republican governor and a Democratic legislature, will something get done? And
speaking of the upcoming elections, Governor Quinn, in addition to trying to find budget solutions, is still trying to find a running mate. The latest news on the vacant lieutenant governor post is that Tammy Duckworth, who's a Hoffman Estates Democrat, Iraq War veteran, used to be the state's director of Veterans Affairs and now has a public affairs role in the Obama administration in Veterans Affairs and on the federal level, told the governor no, that she's not interested in being on the ticket with him. Part of that would be she would have had to quit her federal job. She's by no means wealthy, and that would be quit your nice federal job with something that you are well respected at doing in order to run with Pat Quinn when there's no guarantee of success was a pretty risky proposition to begin with, and she opted out of it. Thoughts on who is going to be lieutenant governor, or have you submitted your resume?
No, I have not, because it looks like the position is going to get killed anyway in 4 years. Because obviously, if Speaker Madigan's introduced the legislation, it's going to be on the ballot, and I think the people will kill it, because I just think they're going to look at this as a less government move, and they're going to nuke the position. The senator in our neck of the woods, John Sullivan's been stumping for it. At first he wasn't, now he was. Obviously Turner has been pushing for it still. So I don't know how it is going to shake out. I just don't know if that job's going to be gone in 4 years. Why do you want it unless you want it to be your swan song? I mean, I haven't looked at the numbers. I guess it'd be a pension bump for Turner if he's getting close. I don't know, but why do you want it unless you're just planning to just ride off into the sunset afterwards?
The Jack Franks, who's a state representative from up in McHenry County, offered the idea of just leave it empty. We seem to be going okay now without a lieutenant governor. Well, I think you could dispute if we're okay now, but it doesn't seem like
okay when we had one.
Yeah,
so.
The lieutenant governor didn't seem to be doing anything dramatic before, and we've gone a few months without one, or a year without one. Why start now with one? Just leave it empty and cash in the savings. Across the ticket, there's also still uncertainty in that we're not quite for sure who the Republican nominee for governor is. We have Bill Brady of Bloomington, a state senator who's a couple hundred votes literally ahead of Kirk Dillard, a state senator from DuPage County, with March 5th, I believe is the date, is the key date that hangs in the future there. It appears that the general guess is that Brady will hold on, barring some kind of revelation of fraud, that Dillard will probably end up bowing out. But for now, everyone's still kind of just sitting around playing nice and waiting to see how the numbers roll in.
It sounds like Dillard's language has almost softened over the last few weeks. He's just he's not as firm and confident about it. And even I was on the floor the other day and asked him about it, and he just said, we're just waiting it out, just kind of chill about the whole thing. And I saw him talking to Brady over in the corner, and there was even talk that they had been talking together as if Brady was the presumptive nominee, and suggestions on some strategies.
Well, Dillard has said unless it's under 100, he's not going to ask for
What's
the
it at
recount.
now, about
247?
Yeah,
something
somewhere
like
it's
that?
under 300, below 200, and it kind of varies.
But it looks like it's going to be Brady. And then, and again, it doesn't matter. I mean, next week, we really have some inside baseball because we're going to have all the state central committee and all the county chairs and all that kind of stuff happens next week. And then, so right after that, then we're going to find out, if it is indeed Brady. And, I don't think he's lost anything in this time. It's not like Pat Quinn has made some kind of political headway on him anyway. So I think they're okay to wait another week, and they'll be fine.
And with that, I'll give Bob the last word. I thank him for joining us. We've run out of time on Capitol View, and thank Tim Magaw for joining us as well. I'm John Patterson. We'll be back next week for another Capitol View. Thanks for watching.